we are becoming racist and our biases are being shaped through learning. And it's very early in life, before even we can like really like 3 years old. By 3 years old, we see that babies, like our toddlers responding differently
Yeah.
towards different races, where as a baby they don't have it yet. So there's a learning part, there's a classical conditioning part. Like, think about it, why people are afraid of Muslims.
Mm-hmm.
I'm Muslim, I come from a Muslim country, so to me, when I was growing up, being a Muslim or religious people, even if you're not religious yourself, you expect them to be better people, like they were the good people, right? And then I come here and like the world changes and there are some terrorist groups, but US exposure to Muslims is mostly through what? News, right? And when they think about a Muslim, they don't imagine me. They imagine someone with a long beard and making noises, cutting heads. And even though there are billions of people, because there's no exposure, the only exposure is something bad happening and this type of people. Through learning, we also learn to associate that, and it's an unconscious type of automatic learning. So it's not like by choice. And when they see someone and they figure out someone is Muslim, when you're on a flight, your nervous system gives a reaction already, right? Like how it's paired. And if you're not exposed to African Americans a lot in your neighborhood, and the only time you look at the media coverage, and most of the time you're seeing it as mostly related to negative stuff, right? Then your brain starts associating it with that and gives up also fear response.
Yeah, because I think that makes sense where people were back in the day, racism, another form of tribalism, right? So you're basically looking at the tribe as the other because back then, or for a very, very long time, for how long, the other was a threat with your resources. And now that we live in the age of abundance, that fear is pretty much out of date and it doesn't serve people. But what about if, on the other hand, say something that's subtle racism, which is kind of like, I remember watching this Instagram, TikTok video or whatever that is of this blonde person from Southern Carolina or California or something like that, being really annoyed at international students, Chinese international students, and their behaviors. And she thought they were loud or they're rude or something like that. Just some sort of mannerism that's in Chinese culture that she thought was obnoxious. I don't remember what it was. It was a few years ago, but it was something like all the Chinese people get together, all the Chinese people are loud when they talk or whatever. And that could apply to all other racial cultures as well. Like some people could say that about Black people or Mexicans or Latinos or what have you. They'll be like, oh, these people are really annoying and obnoxious. And I'm wondering what that, and they say like these type of people, and even the subgroups, there's those who are born here in North America who would actually make fun of that type of group. That doesn't actually pose a threat to resources. Yet we still kind of group them as that type of annoying behavior. How do we, I think, and I'm just speaking out loud here, I wonder where that comes from. Like,
so it's the same thing. It's none of that's because it's relevant. It doesn't have to be relevant because we evolved that way. We still have certain, I think, tendencies in our wiring for that, even though they are not relevant. We talked about that before. We still have a nervous system and brain that is
the other
hunter-gatherer. But so that's the problem. It's not relevant here anymore, but it's still in the culture, and we are learning it through also social environment. So it keeps perpetuating itself, combined with the tendency, even though it doesn't make sense right now, it keeps going on. So I think the issue is, number one, like, I don't know even how we would, if we try to eradicate that. I see the solution as, and at this point in time at least, becoming aware of it and creating kind of policies and systems and awareness so that we can deal with it, right? Yeah. Rather than like, even if we get rid of it, I don't know how we can clean up all these belief systems, societal things, and then we learn from that, like these underlying beliefs or the biological tendencies. But I think the first step is becoming aware that we have those, implicit tendencies of responding in such a way and checking ourselves, because we also have a different part of our brain, prefrontal cortex, that helps us inhibit behavior. So we have the fight flight system that we discussed in earlier episodes.
Mm-hmm.
But we don't go around when we are in the fight mode, we don't go around punching people. How many people did you punch in your life? I don't know. I don't want to know the answer. You may have punched some people. I haven't punched people yet, but did I want to punch people? I did. Do I have a tendency to feel that anger? And I was like, I want to punch you in the face. I did. But thanks to my prefrontal cortex, there's a part of my brain that inhibits the behavior that I find wrong or dangerous or whatever. So I have the ability to inhibit it, right?
Yeah, that's
but
right.
We can make things explicit, like our desire to punch someone. It's easier to inhibit it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think what I'm trying to get to is the fact that, so in the example of the girl from, I think it's California, who was making fun of Asian people because they act a certain way. So, and the reason why I'm trying to get to that, because this is the most common type of group, discriminating group and just like that story that you said about that person who said she isn't racist, I think a lot of those people do not believe they're racist. In fact, it kind of stemmed from people not acting the way that another group considers cool. So, and I think this could actually, and I think there's some sort of similarity and parallel here to like even high school, the cool group and the not cool group. And if you just follow my logic here, because the cool group would think that the other group is not cool, and then they would just kind of shun them, outcast them, because they would just act weird. And we can never really put our finger on why it is that that person acts weird, but we just do, right? And we can't actually, and at least within that ecosystem, whatever was accepted as the dominant way of acting was the cool group, and that dominated. And then the others were the others, right? And there's almost like different tiers of them, like the nerds or whatever it is. You would just put them into groups. And I noticed the same thing also happened with race, even within the context of high school, I remember. So like, I remember I was dating someone, and she was a Filipino person, and she was part of the cool group or whatever. But I remember her talking about how she wanted to be white because that's where all the cool people were. And she kind of was embarrassed of being Filipino. And she talked about how she didn't want to disassociate with them. And she remember hearing a story about where there was a guy that she knew, where people in school were talking about a guy fighting a Filipino guy, and somebody asked who, and they said, oh, just some Filipino guy. I remember, and she told me her reaction was like, oh man, I'm so embarrassed. So it's like she wanted to separate from that race because she thought they were embarrassing. She thought that they acted a certain way. She thought they were dirty. She thought they were lower class. She thought they were all maids and all that type of stuff. They were the other, right? Even though her herself was Filipino, she didn't want to become that way. So
it's important, because the thing is, you can be racist towards your own race.
Yeah, I'm saying that like it's almost like it's replaced racism for being cool, right? So it's kind of like she didn't think it was cool. And so if you replace the Filipino people with white, where it's just as odd, right? And say that she was related to them, it's like a dissociation. So I wonder if there's like a similar path where any form of discrimination you just swap it out with, say, race or ethnicity or a group. It has a similar pattern. I wonder, right? I wonder what that would be. I'm just wondering, because her thinking about not wanting to be white, which is part of the cool group, and not wanting to be part of them because of all the stuff, them be dirty and all that type of stuff is very similar to why people don't want to, in high school didn't want to be part of the nerd group or whatever. They want to be part of the cool group, and they always
It's a
thought,
hierarchy.
right? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, it's a hierarchy.
Yeah.
And when you think about race can be, used as a form of classifying people under a hierarchy, and the dominant race will be on the top, and then there may be a pecking order in that sense. And humans seem to be getting hierarchies naturally, like in high school, even even if they have the same race, right? So there is something that comes with the hierarchy. If you are at the top of the hierarchy, what you're doing is normal and cool and desired, and anything different from that is not desired.
Yeah.
So,
What determines that? I
I'm
wonder. What determines that then? I mean, if we talk about race specifically, it's like the dominant race. So the dominant race is the dominant hierarchy. But even on a micro level, what determines where it's completely unstructured, where, like especially nowadays, there's a lot less racism. So it's like, in her case, it was simply there was a lot of Asians and there was a lot of non-Asians, but the hierarchy still was that these white people tend to be cool, and she was Filipino, so she was part of that. What determines hierarchy in an unstructured environment?
I think even though things may have been better, but they are not as good as people like to think. I
Yeah.
think race still plays a big role subconsciously in people's mind, what we find cool. Or
Yeah.
not still associate the skin of color, even, you can go even the change of the race, like the whiter the better. Even, in Asian cultures, I know that there's so many skin whitening, right?
Right.
And the lighter the skin, the higher the status. And I know in some other countries among Black people, the darker and lighter, there's like discrimination between darker shades even. So I think a lot of it is still going on implicitly and subconsciously in our minds, and what makes certain things cool. Even when we don't realize why it's cool, we associate it with that. And I think, of course, power it's a societal thing, right? Like power in every sense, economically, politically, culturally. US is dominated, where the power is very in an imbalanced way, and among whites. And also
Yeah.
portrayal in media, in the movies, it's getting better recently, but like it just recently we are seeing more diverse casts in movies and shows. It just started, it's baby steps. So we have a long way to go around that. And I think it's very important because there are ways to actually, I think we can overcome this happening. For example, okay, this is an interesting study. They did a study with baseball, what do you call it, umpires, and what do you call the other ones?
I'm not sure. There's a pitcher, there's a batter.
Yeah, I think pitchers. So, and they looked at the, how umpires call the strikes, and they saw that they were biased against the other race. So if they belong to the same race, they were more lenient towards zeros and not to the people from other races. So there's a racial effect on how an umpire called a strike. But what they found was, if they were evaluated by their decisions afterwards, that effect disappeared.
If they were evaluated with
Afterwards, how they called the shot, if people scrutinize after that, they changed the setting in a way that they had to give an account why they called that, then we see that difference disappearing, right? So if you leave it to your own accord, we may see a bias and discrimination.
Sorry?
Yeah.
Sorry about that. Yeah.
But it seems like when they know that they're going to be evaluated on that action, then we see that reversal of it. Because again, our prefrontal cortex has enough power to make a future projection. I'm going to be scrutinized. I need to be careful. I need to make sure I'm giving a just decision here. So we can overcome that. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So it made me think about like the police force, right? What kind of processes can we put in place that in a way that the police force is going to think, okay, like my behaviors are going to be like, but this cannot be only one of cases like this one where it's recorded and it becomes viral. It has to become like that for every case, that they feel like, okay, I need to make sure. Like, for example, there was one, like stopping, for example, for checking in traffic, when the police were asked that, like, had to check a box that it was intelligence informed, then the behavior of stopping people decreased. So because now the system is asking them, why did you stop that person? You have to show a reason. Then the behavior decreases. So I think my point is, this seems so inherent, so prevalent, and we have to recognize it's there at this point, and I think develop ways to minimize that effect as much as possible, rather than figure out, it's like, let's wish it away and let's not, get people. I don't know how to erase it at this point. I know what would make it better, but I don't know how to completely erase it in short term.
Yeah, I mean, that's a tough one, especially when you're in the police force. You have no time to think. You can only react and be emotional. That's it. You can only go on instinct. And so, especially if you're a high testosterone man, which is pretty much what all policemen are, they're high testosterone. It's all instinct for them. You speak to any one of them, especially in the action, they don't listen. Talk to about, and that's not only for police, that's bouncers, that's security guards, that's the military. High tense situations, it's all instinct, all testosterone, and no thinking. So I wonder if part of the way, and maybe that's probably what gets probably the deep down probably prejudice out, because they just don't think, right? I wonder if there's a way to mitigate that type of fight, because you're in fight or flight at that point,
Yeah,
right?
there is actually.
So is there a way to mitigate that in that situation, so that the person, because I think ultimately people aren't really racist, right? But they act terribly, right? The guy didn't want to, like, this is not me defending the police officer by any means, but I could probably say, and probably everybody would agree with like 90% certainty, the guy, if he could go back in time and not have that happen, not having killed George, he probably would have chose not to. But it was a terrible decision, and it was a terrible decision based on various things. But it was because but probably if he had less testosterone and was more thinking and less, at the moment being completely like engulfed with his, like, being instinctual and being in that fight or flight mode, the outcome probably would have been different. So I wonder if that could be an issue as well, on top of, trying to, discussion, right?
Yeah, totally. That's the biggest problem with police force, because
Right.
by the nature of their job, they have to be in fight or flight position.
Yeah.
That's literally, they are in positions of threat. Like there are things they are either need to be in mode of fighting or running away. So it's not like perfect time to be thinking. And when you're in fight or flight, and especially in those kind of cases, yeah, the brain doesn't really have time to think. It shuts it down, and these actions can be very knee-jerk reactions. But that's the problem. When the systems and processes are a little more racist, all the messaging in the society is also racist, and they accumulate in your mind. When these kind of situations happen, it's not surprising that they are going to that level, and because their system is reacting to these people as a form of threat.
Yeah.
Right? Even though there's no good reason for it, because it's automatic. So we see that in brain as well. So for example, there was a study and they were playing a game, and when they were playing a game, like white people played against white people, they took it as a challenge. So what happens when we are faced with a challenge is, yeah, we have increased blood flow to our muscles, but we also have increased blood flow to our brain, and our actually cognitive performance increases. But when we see something as a threat, we discussed that already, our cognitive abilities start shutting down. We have a tunnel vision, right? And then, so we respond completely differently to a threat than a challenge. And when you're playing a game, it's supposed to be a challenge, right? Because there's no real threat. But when white people played against black people in that game, and they were measuring their autonomic nervous system responses, the nervous system responded as if it's a threat. So the race made the difference between taking it as a challenge or a threat. So one of my Facebook friends had, had some issues in the past before, and he had experiences with the police force. And because he had like some mental health difficulties in the past, and today he's struggling with it too. But all those experiences were very kind. He's a wild male of a, like a social status, the way he talks and stuff like that. So none of those touch points with the police force was negative, because I think they naturally respond to him like, this guy, even if he's going through mental health issues right now, is not a threat. Even though there are like significant indicators of this person might be a threat because he's having an acute mental health issue at that point in time. But with Black people doing regular things and no apparent signs of threat, their nervous system reacts to it as a threat. And I think that's why it's very important, like whatever comes to your brain learns it. And there's this fast thinking and slow thinking. Like fast is really subconscious, automatic. It happens really fast. And the other one is more deliberate and slow and conscious. So if we have time to use that slow thinking in that kind of situation, as you're saying, I'm sure they may have taken other ways of doing things. They may have, most of them, some of them not.
Yeah.
But I think because there's no time for that, it's an immediate reaction thing. It creates an situation for terrible outcomes. But this has to be dealt in a systemic way. Like you cannot leave it to the individual, police officer's nervous system at that point, right? You have to develop ways, understanding that there's a risk for that, because there is this implicit bias, there's explicit bias going on in the police force, first of all. Even if for people who don't feel that they have that, there's implicit bias, subconscious bias going on. So we have to take precautions for this. We cannot, wish that they don't exist and leave it to chance what's going to happen when this police officer is in that position and in a position of power. And we're seeing what's happening. And, it's, and I think it's, there was someone talking about it, saying that this is also health, serious health concern, national health concern. Because imagine all these Black people doing regular things. How much stress, constant stress this must be causing them, right? And when you have chronic high levels of cortisol, it causes so many health problems as well. And also being racist causes a lot of health problems, because being racist means that you see these people as threat, and so your cortisol levels are high. You're already in fight or flight system. So there's health costs for the racist as well. So we need to figure out what we need to do. But to your question, for example, we know from, again, brain imaging studies, when you show a person from another race and then your brain. So, okay, when you show a picture of a face and you look at what happens in the brain, the part of the brain that is responsible for recognizing faces lights up. So there's a part of your brain just reserved for kind of recognizing faces. So we see that activity there, right? But when you show them a picture from another race, guess what? That's not the first place that lights up. It's your amygdala, that system that is responsible for fear and threat. So it's like very subtle thing, but you can reverse that by providing information about that person that you're showing picture to. So if you show a picture from another race, but now you say, Tony, he does marketing, he loves surfing, and he loves whatever, ice cream. He's, his hobby is making ice cream.
Mm-hmm.
Even that simple familiarity reverses that effect. Now the brain, when you look at the brain, you see that now my brain recognizes your face as a face, mm-hmm. rather than using the threat system.
Yeah, I mean, there's been questions. I mean, I don't know who it was, but there was an interview of saying like one of the things that suggested is that you allow the Black community to police the Black community, and like the white, because it's a different culture and a different, like it very well could be that if you have and you're talking about familiarity, but if you have a Black police officer police a Black police officer, there might be less fight or flight because it's more recognizable, right? And if you let the white community police the white community and Asian community, I mean, I think they're already doing that, but I mean, that could be part of the system as well, because yes, there is something systemic, but if we're talking about purely what you're talking about, which is the other and the tribe, that's the fastest way to shortcut that situation.
Yeah,
right?
I think that also we can still go beyond race, because familiarity can be gained. It doesn't have to be the same race, right? I think police needs to be more connected to communities. Yeah. And familiar with the communities that they are working in, maybe like more community-based policing, in a way that they are involved in the community and they know the community that they are in. And it can be a very diverse community. It doesn't matter your race, but you're involved in the community, you have familiarity to all the components of it. I think it's going to be a different case. And also, we know the power of in-group and out-group, but you can make people your in-group. There is no biological barrier to have other races as your in-group, because we have that all the time. You can form a family, right, from different races, so you can make them in group, obviously.
Right.
So, and they found like even simple things as putting people in the same team, giving a task together, overcomes those biases. So it's about creating an in-group. Like look at, in Europe, soccer mm-hmm. is the most popular sport, right?
Yep.
And these people from different teams can kill each other, literally. Like in Turkey, I know, like there's so much, they have to protect, the cops have to protect during games, like, because you cannot let these people be together. When I came to US and I see sometimes like different teams.
Football games, yeah, people get.
Yeah, you can sit with other teams and they won't kill each other. It was like a news to me, because I'm used to, like in soccer, you have to keep them separate. You cannot allow them to mix, because you don't know what's going to happen.
They'll kill each other.
Super passionate. And it's all about in-group and out-group. It's us versus them, right? And it's a fucking soccer team. It's not even real. It's a made-up thing, right? Yeah. But it's so strong. Race doesn't matter at that point. It's just being the other team. You're labeled Team B. That's it. Yeah. So it's so powerful that by expanding the circle of in-group, I think we can also overcome. Like there's a cultural elements of how we define who our in-group is, can make a difference.
That's true. That's definitely true. Yeah, that's why people have joked about if aliens, the best way to unite the world is fighting aliens.
Yeah, exactly, right? Aliens become out group, and all humans are, all of us, at an in-group right now.
Right.
So we can create a culture that we have a different definition of what our in-group is versus what our out-group is. And I think that would play a role. And you see that, like it's about, like, if you see yourself as a citizen of the world, the way you think about other nations, let alone the race, other nations and their well-being, in a completely different way, than if you feel like you have very strong nationalistic kind of sentiments.
Right. Right.
What you feel about other nations is completely different, right?
Yeah, that's exactly it.
But you know what I think the best solution to this is, what can make real dent into this,
What's that?
what we discussed last time, psychedelics, psilocybin,
That's
for
true.
example. Why? Because we know even one use can change the personality trait of openness to new experiences. And we see there's this, and conservatives' point of views are like, when you look at people, it's more like the personality types that have less openness to novelty. Right? And if you think about race as being different and new, if you have openness to new experiences, you have a more of less threat response to new and different stimuli. Right? If you can change people's reactions towards new stimuli, I think it will also change, certain like the inherent biases that we have to different people than us.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's true. We should get all cops high on LSD.
Yeah, no, like, and hopefully the psilocybin, LSD, and the psychedelics are going to be approved for therapy soon, and then I think it should be also used therapeutically, and I think that opening to therapeutic use is going to change the society as well.
Yeah, I think so too, in a big way. I mean, there's a lot of companies doing some research on that right now, but I mean, it's going to be quite a while.
Who knows? Maybe not. Hopefully
Yeah.
sooner than we think, because I think there's progress happening on that front, and I really believe that it may be useful, because we know also, we talked about like how you can rewire those people memories. You can you have the chance under psychedelics to form new connections in the brain, and because we need to break the pattern as a society. Like the current pattern is breeding a lot of discrimination, racism, and the problems we are facing, and we need to break this pattern to be able to implement a new pattern. And I think that's going to be a good adjunct doing that.
I agree. Yeah. Well, there we go. We now have a solution to racism.
I don't know. It's like a full solution, but I think it will help. Yeah. Like, to summarize, I think psychedelic use of, as a therapeutic tool is going to help, dealing with these things in a little bit better, and dealing with our nervous systems a little bit better. Gaining familiarity between groups, and especially like hopefully getting police force more involved in the communities and creating that kind of exposure. And also for all of us, checking our own implicit biases. Right? There is a test which I'm going to put it on there in the comments after. Did you know about this test that can check your implicit bias, racial biases?
No, what is it?
So there's a scientific test that you can take. The way they do it, like, they are showing like really fast images, and then you have to make decisions really fast, so that you're only using the past system, right? That implicit reactive system, not your conscious, deliberate system. And it shows if you have racial biases or not. So you can test it right after this call to see your own racial biases. I think everybody should take that test, at least understand if they, if they have those biases or not towards different races. And if you do, it doesn't mean you're a bad person. This is because you've been fed this, or, it can be biological and through learning. Doesn't matter. It's not about for you to feel bad, like what a bad person you are, you have implicit bias. It's not about that. Take that information and be aware of it, so that you can use more discernment in terms of like, don't be an Amy Cooper. I'm not a racist, but then you act in ways like that causes like you know that there's an incongruency there. So to get out of that incongruency, first we need to realize our biases and then figure out what we want to do about them.
Yeah, definitely makes sense. All right, I think we're out of time, but just in time. This was a great conversation, and hopefully we'll continue conversation about other things. And then yeah, we did definitely gotta check out that quiz to kind of find out if we have biases in ourselves, because a lot of people who act out don't consider themselves racist, and it's important to humble ourselves to make sure that if we have any
Well,
type of
because you cannot fix something you don't know that you have.
exactly.
It's impossible.
That's
First,
right.
figure out if you have that, then we can figure out what we can do about it.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
All right, awesome.
All right.
Thank you for being here.
Yeah.
And I'll see you next week.